Hello everyone, welcome to Great Heights Training for the next part of the A1 Assessor course lesson. You've done lesson 1, which is assessment planning and having an induction with your learner already. And we're just going to quickly recap. Assessment planning is the plan that you do to decide how you're going to assess your learner in terms of gathering evidence for their portfolio. Definitely, because as an A1 assessor, what you're doing is trying to prove that your learner is competent, and how you do that is by gathering different types of evidences that will go into the portfolio that will show that that person is actually competent, and therefore the awarding body will be able to issue certificate for that learner based on you as an assessor, what decision you make. Now, I'm sure you all have seen the template that we use for assessment planning, which shows how you actually assess your learner and how you fill it out, what you need to do. But we'll talk more about that in the next lesson when we actually show you how to do the assessment plan and how to do the feedback. Today we'll talk a bit more about assessment methods, which is these are the methods that you use to assess your learner so that you can gather the evidence that you will need to show that that learner is competent. There are different types of assessment methods, and I'm sure you are familiar with some of them already, because in the questions that a lot of you have done, you have had to talk about different assessment methods. But what we will do today is to look at each and every method individually and go a bit deeper into them to explain what they are, what they mean, and how do we work with them, and how do we use it to show that our candidate is competent. Now, as an assessor, you need to be aware of all the different methods. You need to be up to date with your awarding body, whichever awarding body you're using, because here we are using MCFE. But when tomorrow you get a contract, you might be using City and Guilds, OCN, OCO. So you have to be familiar with every single awarding body. Even now, even though you haven't become an assessor yet, it's good for you to go on those awarding bodies website and you look at the different standards for the course that you're going to be assessing, whether it's health and social care, hairdressing, business admin, customer service. Just familiarize yourself with it, read and try to see how they do it. And most awarding bodies, when they give you a standard for the subject that you're going to assess, they always give you examples of what type of evidence you will need for each unit, which is very helpful because that will guide you as an assessor to know what you need to do. Now, it might look complicated, but with practice, as you assess more and more learners, it will become very easy to you to know what method you can use for what criteria. What I mean by criteria is when you assess somebody, you have to assess them against the criteria which is given by the awarding body. For example, if you're doing health and social care and how to help an individual to eat and drink, there are different criteria that you have to show that that person is competent in doing. And sometimes in those units there will be something called like food and hygiene, like making health and safety, like communication. How do you communicate with your service user before you even start feeding them? So these are the criteria, and these are set by the awarding body, and this is what you will need to use to plan how you will assess that client. Because when you decide which assessment method you'll be using, you have to make sure that the method that you choose will help you to hit each and every assessment criteria that the awarding body has, so that your learner you can decide that your learner is competent. And now, one thing that I would like to say is, before you start working with a learner, before you even go out there and do an assessment plan with them, it's good for you to familiarize yourself with the different units that the learner will be doing. Look at the standards set by the awarding body and plan yourself beforehand the different methods that you think can be used to assess that specific unit. Once you are confident with that, then you can go and meet your learner, and based on that you can agree with your learner on which methods they think will best suit them. And then at least you will not be, it's not when you go and meet your learner that you will start thinking, oh, which method am I going to use? And that will make life easier for you if you plan beforehand. So let's plan beforehand what are the different methods we can use to assess our learner. Now we'll go through the different methods. The first one is reflective account. A reflective account, like the word says, is when a learner or anybody reflect on what they have done in the past. Maybe on one day at work, your learner can sit down and reflect, what did I do yesterday at work? And with that, they will write a story. They will write something like a reflective account saying, yesterday when I got to work, I signed in at the reception. After signing in, I had to go and change, and this is what I did. This is what I did next. I went to meet Mr. X, and this is what I did. When they start doing that, this is them reflecting back on one day at work. When they write that story, you as an assessor, you'll be able to then take that and start looking at the assessment criteria from the awarding body, and based on that, start to link it with what the person has written in their account, and then you can see which criteria that reflective account that person is hitting. Now, one thing we've learned, we've experienced, is that sometimes you can ask your learner, go and write me a reflective account of what you did at work yesterday. They can sit down and write 2 pages for you. But there might be a situation when they bring those to you, you can't use it because the way the learner has written it, it's not easy for you to match it against criteria that the awarding body has. So that's why it's also important, before you give a learner an assignment to go and write something, it's good to give them the standards from the awarding body so that they can then look at it, and when they are writing their reflective account, they will write it in such a way that it will be easy for you as an assessor to look at that reflective account and be able to match it with the standard, the assessment criteria in the awarding body standards. And one thing is, reflective account is always written in the past tense because it's something that the learner has already done. What they are doing, they are just writing it on paper, what they did yesterday. So make sure that when your learner is writing a reflective account, they write it in the past tense, and it's always something that they have done before. Now, if you have any questions, just to remind you, as a remote learner, make sure you email your questions, and then we'll reply you back with the different answers that we need to give you. The next assessment method we'll look at now is observation. Observation is one of the biggest part of NVQ assessment because observation is the most authentic method of assessment, because when you're carrying out an observation, you as the assessor, you are there in person. You can see your learner actually doing the work. You can see them doing what they said they did when they did their reflective account. Because when somebody writes a reflective account, it's easy for them to say, I did this, I did this, I did this. But it's only based on what they say, which is now when you do an observation, you'll be able as an assessor in person be able to assess them and look at everything they wrote in their reflective account. Is it true that that's what they are doing at work? So observation is very important because it helps back up everything that a learner writes. It's one thing that's used to back up other types of evidences like work products, which is what the learner do at work. We'll look at that later, but just to let you know that observation is something that's very, very important. Now, as an assessor, before you go on and do an observation with your learner, you have to make sure you prepare them for it. So you would have agreed beforehand with your learner that on this date at that time, I'm going to come and observe you on this and this and this. It's very important that you let your learner know when you're coming to observe them what you expect to see. Because if you, for example, as somebody assessing business administration, you are planning to go and observe your learner answering the phone, and then if you don't tell your learner, maybe on that day they are not doing telephone duty, so then that will be a waste of time and a waste of resources. Remember, we looked at assessment planning. It has to be cost effective. It has to be time effective, so which means it's saving you money and it's saving you time. So that's why it's very important that everything is planned in advance. Before you go out and do an observation with your learner, let them know which day you're coming and agree with them and make sure that they have permission, because sometimes, especially in health and social care, when you go and observe a learner in the care home, their manager has to be aware of it, and the manager has to approve and give their consent. You don't want to turn up there after traveling a long way and then the manager says, sorry, I wasn't expecting you. That's going to be a big problem. So you have to make sure that as an assessor, your learner might not know, but you should know. And you make sure when you agree with them, you ask them, will your manager be aware of it? Will you make sure that you get permission? Because when you come there, you don't want to waste your time. You want to go there and observe and do what you have come to do. And when you're observing as well, make sure that you plan yourself on what you're going to observe. It's always good to carry with you the standards of the different units that you're going to observe, so that when you're doing your observation, it's easy for you to look at the assessment criteria and make notes of which one the person is actually doing and is actually covering, so that anything that's missing, you can find something else to, you can probably lead the person or prompt them to do it, or find another method of assessment to cover those things. So when you're observing your learner, make sure you always, there are different ways of doing it. You could write notes. You could have a format where you take notes while they are carrying out the different duties that they are doing. You can be making notes for your own record, because remember, after that observation, you will have to go and write an observation report. So you need to make sure that you do not miss out on anything. So find out the best method for you to record the information that's happening as you are watching it. If you're doing business admin, you can do video recording. You can even do audio recording, so which means even while the person is doing their duties, if you want, you can quickly use your telephone even to make note and record your voice to say, this is what I'm seeing, this is what the person is doing. If you're doing health and social care, for example, you cannot use video recording, but it's good for you to have a pen and paper. When you're there observing your learner, you could be writing out the notes and making notes of the different things that the person is doing. That will help you to then write your observation report later on. That will help you, that you will need to use to give feedback to your learner on their performance, as well as giving them review, and as well as making an assessment decision. So it's very important to do that. In terms of observation, if you are recording an observation or you are video recording it, then it's in the present tense. But if, for example, you go out there in health and social care to go and observe somebody, and then you come back home to write your report, then you could do it in the past tense. So it depends really at which time you are actually writing your report. That's the tense you will use to write the report. The next thing we will look at is professional discussion. Now, a professional discussion is something that we will have to do even for your A1 training, because as part of the evidence, you as a learner will have to have a professional discussion with your assessor, where you will tell me different things that I will use to record and then assess you based on the criteria, which is good practice, because then you get to see how it is done. But professional discussion is a discussion that happens between an assessor and a learner. So it can be on a topic, it can be on one unit, or it can be holistic, which means on different units. It's not a question and answer, because there's always that confusion. What's the difference between professional discussion and question and answer? It can be similar in terms that it's asking question and getting an answer back. But when it comes to professional discussion, it's not, when you ask your learner a question, you don't expect them to give you a one-line answer or to tell you yes or no. It has to be something, a question, the question that you ask has to be a question that will prompt your learner to go into a discussion and start talking more about what you've asked them. And as they are giving you that answer, you are asking them along the way more questions, because you know the different criteria that you have to cover on that unit. So which means when the learner is talking to you and telling you the different answers, they are telling you, maybe your professional discussion could be, it's similar to a reflective account in a way, because you could even also learn, okay, when you get to work, what are the different health and safety issues that you have to take into consideration? That's probably like for business admin, or if a customer service, or even health and social care. Then the person will start talking, they will start telling you when they get to work what they do. Then depending on how they are going, then as an assessor, you know what you want to hear. You know what you're expecting the learner to tell you. Then you will prompt them in the right direction. You will keep asking them questions until they give you the right answer. In a professional discussion, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just the way it goes has to be led into the direction that will help you to get the answers for you to cover the criteria that you are there to cover. So which means the way you will ask them a question, you're not just going to ask them a quick question and expect an answer. You will ask them a question and you will expect them to tell you a story or to be telling you things. And when they start, you just keep prompting them to keep going on deeper and deeper in the topic that you are talking about. Now, a professional discussion is an assessment method that can be audio recorded, which is very good really, because even in health and social care it can be audio recorded, because you're not doing it in the care home where the person works. You could be doing it anywhere, as long as, because it makes life easier for you as an assessor. While you're asking that question, you record it so that when you go home, then you can play it back and start cross-referencing. Whereas if you just let the person talk and you make note, you create double work for yourself, because when you go home now you have to sit down and start typing a report based on that professional discussion. So I would encourage people to always try and record professional discussion, because it's easier and you do not miss out on anything. You can clearly hear them, what they are saying, and it's very authentic even for evidence in terms of IV and EV. When you give a professional discussion that's recorded, they can actually hear your voice as the assessor, and they can hear the voice of the learner, which makes it very reliable and very authentic. So it's always good to record your professional discussion. And before you even start doing a professional discussion with a learner, plan yourself. Just make sure you know what you want to achieve from it. Usually professional discussions are used by assessors to cover certain criteria that haven't already been covered by other methods of assessment. Quickly, when you're assessing somebody, let's say there are different criteria you need to hit. There are different methods of assessment. Usually in NVQ training, for good practice, it's always advisable and it's always important that every single criteria that you want to cover, you use 3 different methods of assessment for each criteria, which means under feeding a client, there will probably be one criteria, which is that the learner communicate well with their service user. Now for that single criteria, you need to be able to prove that your learner does that using 3 different methods of assessment. So it could be a reflective account, an observation, and a professional discussion. That will give this criteria 3 ticks. So which means you've covered that criteria 3 times using 3 different of assessment. Now every single criteria in NVQ has to be covered at least 3 times using 3 different methods of assessment. And most times one of those methods will always have to be an observation. And then one can be a reflective account or witness statement, anything else. But one professional discussion, if for example you're assessing a learner and you realize that you've hit one criteria only twice, then you can plan your professional discussion to hit that criteria a 3rd time. So always make sure that you plan which method you will use before you actually start assessing somebody. The next thing we will look at is witness statement. Now a witness statement, like it says itself, is somebody giving witness to what somebody else is doing. So which means, for example, when if somebody is working, they will usually have a manager or a supervisor or even a team leader. So which means if you're working in health and social care, business admin or customer service, you can always ask your learner, can they get a witness statement from their manager? And it's always good to do that, because it's always good to involve a 3rd party in the assessment plan. So which means you have somebody else there. So it's not just you as an assessor saying that this person is competent. You have that person, supervisor or manager, who's been working with them longer than you know them. They can actually say, yes, that this person at work, they do this, and they are competent. So witness statement is something that's given by a 3rd party, and that will show whether this person is competent. Now before you ask somebody to get you a witness statement, always let them know what you are expecting that witness statement to say, because you don't want a witness statement that comes where the manager just say, oh, this is to confirm that Mrs. X works very well at work and performs, because you won't be able to cross-reference that with any assessment criteria because it's not specific. So you need to tell the person, if you're doing business admin, you probably can tell the person, I need your manager to write a witness statement saying how good you are, or what do you do when you write a letter, or when you answer the phone, or when you use office equipment. If it's in health and social care, it will be the same thing. Manager, you asking the manager, what do you do when it comes to health and safety issues? How do you communicate with your service users? So you have to be very specific with your learner when you tell them to get a witness statement from you. Now there's 2 different types of witness statement. There's something that's called witness statement, and that could be from anybody. It can even be from a service user. If in the care home the service user is capable and can give a witness statement, it can be from them. And witness statement can also be recorded. So which means if you have, like for example in customer service, your customer can give a witness statement. You can get them to record saying how good you are, how effective you are communicating with them and giving them good customer service. So witness statement can be written or recorded, and that can be from anybody, from a service user, from your customer, from manager, from team leader. There's something else called an expert witness statement. The difference is expert witness statement has to come from somebody who's higher than you, which means it cannot be from somebody who's working on the same level as you. It cannot be from a service user. It cannot be from a customer. It has to be from somebody who's like a manager or a director, a supervisor, somebody who's got a higher post than you in that company. So that's the difference between witness statement and expert witness statement. Not a lot of people use expert witness statement, but witness statement is the most common one. But just so you know the difference in terms of when you want to do an expert witness statement, always make sure that it's written by somebody who's not working on the same level as your learner. It has to be somebody who's at a higher level or more in charge. Now let's move forward and look at the next assessment method. That one is called work products. Work products is usually more popular in business admin or customer service, but it's coming back in health and social care as well. Work products is anything that your learner does at work, anything that they produce, which is in terms of business admin, if your learner writes letters, reports, they take telephone messages, all these can be classified as work products. They can go in the portfolio of that learner to show, yes, this is the letter that my learner wrote. This is a telephone message that my learner took. So that's a work product. In terms of health and social care, a care plan is a work product, which shows something that the learner has done at work and that shows that they are competent in doing it. Now, the one thing that you need to be aware with work product is if it's something that's got confidential information, before you put it in that learner's portfolio, or even before that learner brings it to you, they have to black out anything that's confidential, especially if there's service user name on it, if there's client's name on it, if there's date of birth on it. They have to make sure they black all this out so that those information cannot be seen by anybody else. So all you will see probably is the format and some wordings, but anything that's confidential information cannot be on a work product. Or for example, if the learner has a work product that cannot be removed from their office, because in some circumstances that can happen, all you need to know as an assessor is make sure that you go to that learner's office with permission, you see where that work product is, and you make a note there in that portfolio that I have seen that work product. It is saved in the learner's office on this computer, that and that. So you can record that, and then it is valid. If the IV wants to see it or the EV wants to see it, at least they can see where it is. It's in that learner's office, and they can try and get permission from the manager to go and see it if they want to. But as long as you, as an assessor, you've seen it and you've recorded where it's saved, that's all fine. So work product is something that your learner do. Now make sure that I'm stressing on that again, that confidential information is not something that people can see, so it has to be kept and it has to be blacked out. Because if there's something that's got confidential information in your learner's portfolio, as an assessor, you will get in trouble with the IV. That piece of evidence will not be able to be used, and you might get some kind of warning, and you do not want that. So make sure you take very care while doing that. Now let's move on to the next method of assessment. That's the APL, which is the accredited previous learning. This is very important now because a lot of IVs, a lot of our awarding bodies, they want people to keep using that. Because, for example, if your learner has done a training before and they have a certificate to show that they've done maybe health and safety, or they've done food and hygiene, or they've done manual handling, then what is the point of you, an assessor, trying to go and do the same thing again and proving that the learner is competent? So you might as well use previous learning that the learner has done as evidence. Now all you need to do is make sure that those certificates that the learner has of previous learning that they've done, that can be used as evidence to show that they are competent in the area that you're assessing them, make sure that they write a summary of what they learned in that training. Because some people do attend training just to get attendance certificate, and there's no point in you saying that that person is confident if you're not sure they are. So which means that person has to make sure you get your learner to write a summary. Let's say they went to a food and hygiene training, so they have to quickly write, maybe even if it's a 3 lines, that I went to the training, this is what I learned, in bullet points, and get them to sign it. Because by doing that, then you are covering yourself as an assessor, and that piece of evidence will then become authentic, valid, and reliable. Without that, that certificate is not valid, that certificate is not reliable. So make sure that any certificates you get from your learners for previous training, you get them to write something on it and you get them to sign it. very, very important, because without that, that piece of evidence cannot be used, it will not be reliable, it will not be valid. And as assessors, you want to make sure you do not waste your time in getting evidences that cannot be used. So you want to make sure you get evidences that are valid, reliable, and authentic. Now, the last evidence assessment method is question and answer. We've talked about it briefly when we started talking about professional discussion, but this is just a quick one to let you know that what a question and answer is where the assessor will ask the learner questions, and it's not always questions that has long answers. They are just questions that go straight to the point and they need a specific answer. And this is something that I'm asking the learner, okay, when you get to work, do you sign in and sign out? That's a question that the learner will just say, yes, when I get to work, I have to sign in at the reception, and when I'm leaving, I have to sign out. This is just to show that the learner follows procedure of the company. But that's like you see, it's not a professional discussion. I'm not asking the learner a question that will get them to start telling me story. It's just a quick question, straight to the point. I ask them a question and they answer it, and I record it. Now, question and answers can be recorded, which is very easy because it will make life very easy for you as an assessor. So you can just use that recording and just cross-reference it and put it on a CD or a DVD or a USB. But if you want, if you don't like recording, you like typing, when you're asking those question and answer, you can even email the question and answers to your learner and get them to just email you back the answers. So that's fine as well. So question and answers is just you asking a quick question to your learner and them just answering you back. So we've looked at the different types of assessment methods, and we've looked at how we use them in gathering evidences and how we make sure that when we gather those evidences, we gather evidence that are reliable, that are authentic, that are valid. And we've also mentioned about observation and other methods, how you make sure that you do it in a way that is cost effective and time effective for both you and your learner. So these are the different assessment methods that you can use for an NVQ assessment. There will probably be more assessment methods that will come in as things go further, as awarding bodies do more research and get more suggestions. But for now, these are the ones that are mostly used. These are the main ones. And as an assessor, you need to make sure you understand each and every assessment method and make sure you familiarize yourself with them and make sure you are comfortable with them. And before you go out and start assessing your learners, make sure that you yourself, you sit down and you look at the units that you need to assess and plan yourself which assessment methods you think will be most reliable to be used for that unit, which assessment method you think will cover most criteria for that unit. Once you do that, your homework, then it will be very easy for you to go out there and assess your learner and do it in a time and cost effective way. Because if you do not plan, you will find out that you go there, you will tell the learner, write reflective account, professional discussion, and then at the end of it, you probably have so many different methods you've used and there will be so many criteria still not met. But if you sit down and you plan yourself very well, the methods that you want to use for each and every criteria, you will do a good job and you will be very cost effective and you will be able to assess more learners in a shorter time, which is what I'm sure we all want to do, because we want to get out there and make sure we make as much money as possible. So if you want to do that, you have to make sure that you plan yourself first and know your stuff. You know what you are doing. Once you know that, you will not have any problem in going out there and assessing your learners. I hope this has been very clear. And what we'll do is you will have a handout for this lesson and just go over it just to remember everything that we've talked about. And then sometimes you have the DVD anyway, so you can always refer back to it when you're answering questions, or even when you want to go out and assess your learner, you can always go back to what we've talked about today. Any questions you have, make sure you email them to us, or when we have our next webinar, you will have a time where you can actually type your questions there, and then we'll deal with those questions, we'll answer them, and everybody will get to hear about it. So I thank you very much, and we'll see you next time for the next lesson.